And now, marine weather around Alaska. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your marine weather outlook for Alaska on this Monday, September 25th, 2023. And we're going to take a look at how marine conditions are shaping up here for the next couple of days, especially Wednesday and on Tuesday. Looking at the ice, still a little bit of melting occurring in the far north. We haven't quite yet had the minimum ice extent reached up here in the Arctic Ocean, but nevertheless, we're getting very close if it has not already occurred. And we usually get word officially of that by sometime in early October. But as far as weather systems to keep an eye on later tonight into early Tuesday morning, fairly strong low just to the southwest of Haida Gwaii coming up out of the northeastern Pacific. It's going to pull back up into the eastern Gulf here Tuesday and on Wednesday. Central pressure late tonight, early on Tuesday morning around 974 millibars, but it will start to gradually fill as we go through Tuesday and certainly by Wednesday. Another low of note is located out in the southwest Bering, and this feature will work its way eastward across the central Bering and then impact areas of the southwest coast. Later Wednesday night and Thursday, we'll have a weak low up here along the northwest Arctic coast, drift northeastward and be located east of Utqiagvik by the time we get into later on Tuesday and Wednesday. So looking at the map here Tuesday afternoon, central pressure of the low approaching up into the southeastern Gulf has come up to about 985 millibars, but there will be gale force winds around this feature and even a few storm force gusts to 50 knots possible along areas offshore of Craig there in the southeastern Gulf. And then we have the low out here in the western Bering working its way eastward. That will also see its central pressure come upwards a bit, but not as strong as the low. So that by Wednesday afternoon, we'll see the low fill back up to around 1,000 millibars here over the eastern Gulf, bringing with it periods of moderate to locally heavy rain across portions of the Panhandle. And winds should also abate by the time we get into Wednesday. Some of the strongest winds will be along the outer southern Gulf Coast here as we go through Tuesday into early Tuesday evening. So the marine forecast for the southeast Panhandle, southeasterly gales to 35 knots. There could even be gusts up to 50 knot storm force winds offshore of Craig on Tuesday. Waves as high as 11 to 13 feet there, Dixon entrance. We're looking at north winds 15 to 20 knots, gust as high as 35 knots, Lynn Canal with waves there of 4 feet. The outer coast winds fall offward the further north you get. Look for east-northeast winds 15 knots west of Gustavus and out of Yakutat Bay with waves 10 feet up that way. And by Wednesday, winds are going to come down. Still could be some near gale force gusts to 35 knots here in areas of Dixon entrance. Southeast winds turning southwesterly, kind of a mixed bag of winds. Central, northern inner channels, Stevens Passage to Lynn Canal. We're looking at northwest to north winds 10 to 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet. The outer coast winds offshore, northeast winds off Sitka, Gustavus 20 knots. Waves 6-7 feet, winds turn more northwesterly as you get out toward Cape Suckling, and they'll be lighter at about 10 knots, but waves still around 6-7 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will be out of the north, off of the Kenai there at 15 knots, 6-foot waves. Strongest winds, west-northwest winds out of Dixon, out of Cook entrance there. At waves of 8 to 10 feet, winds across the northern portion of the region. We're looking at north winds within Prince William Sound, 15 knots, 3-foot waves, and waves northerly to 10 knots there, Upper Cook Inlet with waves maybe as much as 2-3 feet around Anchor Point. And then for the day on Wednesday, we're looking for northwest winds, Prince William Sound, 15 knots, waves 3 feet there. Winds generally 15 to 20 knots along the Kenai. And then for the entrance to Cook Inlet, still 30-knot northwest winds with 8-foot waves anticipated there. The Kodiak Island winds will be westerly on Tuesday at 25 knots, 4-foot waves, Shelikof Strait. Off of Kodiak Island, 8-foot waves. Northwest west winds 15 to 20 knots become variable around 10 knots in the vicinity of Cold Bay and Falls Pass. Keep in mind, Shashalden volcano has been active, and it has even put down some volcanic ash in the vicinity of False Pass. So if that continues to be an issue, there could be some additional deposits, but we're not anticipating anything too heavy at this point. And then for Wednesday, west winds across Kodiak Island, east of Chignik, 20 to 25 knots, waves 5 to 7 feet. Winds turn back around to the southwest and then southeast there north of Cold Bay at 15 knots, waves generally 4 to 5 feet on the North Pacific side, and around 3 to as high as 5 feet north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. For the Aleutian chain, a mixed bag of winds 10 to 15 knots, eastern central Aleutians becoming southwesterly, especially west of Adak, 25 to as high as 35 knots there just east of Shemya, with waves building to 10 to 14 feet in the far western Aleutians, because we do have that low in the southwest corner of the Bering Sea, bringing in these stronger southerly winds. And then for Wednesday, that low will be passing well north of the Aleutians into the central Bering with the strongest winds, highest waves just north of the central Aleutians. We're looking at the eastern Aleutians, south-southwest winds 20 knots, as high as 25 knots once you see them turn back to the west, especially north and west of Adak, with waves that way 7 to 11 feet. Along the southwest coast, northwest winds within Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays 10 to 15 knots, waves running a couple of feet. Variable winds 10 knots around St. Paul. Northeast to northwest winds along Norton Sound and the lower Yukon Delta at 10 knots with waves 2 to 3 feet. And for Wednesday, with that low approaching St. Matthew late in the day, easterly winds there at 20 knots. Winds will become south-southwest, 15 to 20 knots into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, waves as high as 5-6 feet in the vicinity of Kuskokwim Bay. More of an offshore flow, southeast winds 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet here, just along and off of the lower Yukon Delta. For south of the Bering Strait on Tuesday, north winds 15 knots, waves generally 3 feet or so. Mixed bag of winds going up through the Chukchi Sea around 10 knots, falling off to 5-knot westerly winds into Wainwright, waves falling off to a foot or two, and then winds south, southwest, and then westerly 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coast with waves 2 to maybe as high as 3-4 feet around Kaktovik. For Wednesday, winds along the Arctic coast, westerly 10 to 15 knots, and as we drop down through the Chukchi Sea, winds will be south-southwest, generally 15 to 20 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And then for south of the Bering Strait, off of Port Clarence in Wales, southeast winds 10 knots, easterly winds to 15 knots with waves around 3 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence Island.